I don't remember how my death started. I could tell it all happened from the moment I fainted. The moment the world around me blurred, and the sounds that had once been part of my daily life disappeared, replaced by an indistinct echo. But that wasn't the case. Time has ceased to exist. I couldn't tell if it was a moment, or an eternity spent in the void. I didn't realize I was dying. I thought I was just falling asleep, but at the same time I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a dream. Maybe I've always been afraid of death. Or, more precisely, not death itself, but what it brings with it, the unknown. We all fear what we don't understand, and I was no exception. I didn't believe in an afterlife, didn't think about what was waiting for me. I just went through life like everyone else, thinking that everything would continue. But now that I was on the edge, it was different. The void I was trapped in wasn't cold or sinister. It was more like something neutral. I didn't feel any pain or fear. Everything around him was swallowed up in darkness. And that darkness wasn't what we used to think it was. It was more than that, not just the absence of light, but something alive and penetrating. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't move. I couldn't move or turn around. The darkness was too thick, too dense. And, despite its strange neutrality, I felt its heaviness, like something that presses on the soul, on the thoughts. I tried to think, tried to focus, but there was only chaos inside me. At some point, I realized that I couldn't remember how I got here. I lost touch with reality, with the world I once lived in. I couldn't remember the faces of people close to me, their voices. I couldn't understand what had happened to me. I was alone in that emptiness. And that's when I felt his presence. It started when I felt his eyes on me. It was warm, but also strangely penetrating, as if it could see right through me. I tried to figure out where that look was coming from, but I couldn't. He wasn't from this world. His presence was inescapable, as if he were part of the darkness and yet above it. Then, as if in response to my concerns, a figure appeared in front of me. It was indistinct, blurry at first, but becoming more distinct with each passing moment. It was a man, and there was such depth in his eyes that I felt as if every time he looked at me, invisible arrows were slamming into me. I didn't know who he was. But I knew he wasn't here by accident. He was standing in some sort of shadow, and there was a mystery in his appearance. It wasn't something ordinary, human. His silhouette didn't match the time, place, or even my reality. I tried to walk over to him, but my legs still wouldn't move. Then he spoke. His voice was low, but there was a power radiating from him that kept me quiet and listening. "You're not here by accident," he said. "You survived death, but you didn't pay attention to what was happening around you. You came here because something was left unfulfilled in your life. And you can't ignore it." I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. "You think you just fell asleep. You think that this darkness is just emptiness, but in reality it is the beginning of your journey. What you don't realize yet is that here you will meet not only death, but also yourself. All these years you've been chasing the outside, success, recognition, comfort. You were looking for your way in the outer world, but you forgot about the inner world. And here you are, on the doorstep." I tried to understand what he was saying, but I couldn't. I didn't know what I needed to do. His words were like a reflection of my own thoughts, but they sounded completely foreign. He took a step closer. And his presence has become something unbearable and fascinating for me at the same time. In his eyes, I saw my life. Everything I tried so hard to hide from myself, my doubts, my fears, my failures. It was all in plain sight. I felt him approach, but I couldn't look away. I couldn't pull away. It wasn't just a person. He was part of something bigger. And I knew that this moment was important. This conversation was important. But what should I do? What is this place? Who are you? I finally blurted out. His eyes flashed. And I realized that the look wasn't judgmental. He was just full of understanding. This place is called Borderline State. Here are all those who have not yet accepted the end, but cannot go back. Those who are stuck between worlds, between life and death. But don't be afraid. This place is not a punishment. This is a chance. Chance. A chance at what? To the rescue. For awareness. I did not know. And then he said, I'm just a messenger. Someone who will help you understand that you are not just a person running from your fears. You're so much more than you realize. But you must be prepared to face it. To meet what is hidden in yourself. And then I realized that everything that was happening right now wasn't an accident. This was the beginning of something much more important. I stood in this strange place where neither time nor space existed, and I felt his words seep into me, as if they were not just sounds, but part of the very essence of my soul. I couldn't look away from his eyes. They were bottomless, but there was no emptiness in them. There was something about it that made me feel both small and important, like I was part of something much bigger than I could have imagined. I wanted to ask him what it all meant. What should I do? Why am I here? But the words wouldn't come. I felt something in my mind begin to resist this sensation, this deep absorption, this silence that was not only around me, but also inside me, filling every cell of my body. He noticed my fear. His face softened, and I felt the tension ease a little. You can't avoid it, he said, as if answering my silent questions. It's part of your journey. This is a borderline state. Here you can see the truth about yourself without hiding it behind the protective walls of your illusions. I stood there, trying to figure out what he meant. Illusions. Of course, the word was familiar to me. How many times have I fooled myself into thinking I know where I'm going? How many times have I built my happiness on other people's expectations, on external assessments? The external life was like a showcase for me, behind which I hid my real self. I built facades, but they were empty. I myself became a part of these illusions. He continued, not giving me time to stop thinking. We all live in illusions. The illusion that we need more than we are. The illusion that happiness is something to look for outside of yourself. But it is here, in this place, that you will find the truth. You will encounter what is hidden from you. And it can be scary. His words echoed in my chest. Fearfully. Yes, I was afraid. I was afraid to admit to myself that I'd spent my entire life looking for answers that weren't where they really were. But why are you here? Why are you telling me these things? Who are you? He chuckled a little, and there was no mockery or resentment in his smile. This was something else. It was a gentleness, full of understanding. I'm not an accident, he said. I'm not you, not someone you'd normally meet. I am a symbol. A symbol that you can be more than you think. What you see in front of you is not me, but a part of your subconscious mind. I imagine the thoughts that you can't let go of. Those images that are hidden in you. I am what you hide because you are afraid. I wanted to answer, but the words wouldn't come. I tried to understand what he meant. I was in this place, in the void, with him, a man who seemed to know more about me than I did. I felt that he was right. I was hiding my fears, my doubts. But why couldn't I get rid of them? Why was it so hard for me to accept myself? Suddenly, shadows appeared in front of me. At first they were barely visible, like a haze, but gradually they became clear. They were all around us, but they weren't evil. They weren't intimidating. They weren't demons in the usual sense, but shadows of my own experiences, the past I'd tried to hide. My failures. My mistakes. My regrets. I saw faces. The faces of people I loved and those I didn't have time to love. I saw moments when I caused pain, when I turned a blind eye to the needs of others. I saw my fears, my shortcomings. It wasn't a nightmare. It was just me, no masks, no excuses, no defenses. This is your reality, he said, seeing me look at these people, these images. You're afraid of it because you think it's part of your weakness. But this is not the case. These shadows are not enemies. They are your teachers. I couldn't help but ask. How do I get rid of it? How can I stop being afraid? He looked at me with deep seriousness. You won't get rid of them. You will accept them. You will realize that your shadow is part of your power. When you learn to live with what was and not be afraid of it, you will discover your true strength. You'll stop hiding and start being yourself. Your true self. The words were so simple, but there was a whole universe in them. In that moment, I realized that everything I was hiding from myself was just a part of who I was. I was afraid of my weaknesses, my fears, my mistakes, but they were my experience. I couldn't be whole without embracing my dark side. You can't avoid this, he repeated, and there was no threat in his voice. Only calm acceptance. But you can learn to live with it. And that's when you'll be free. The shadows began to fade, but there was silence in my heart. I knew this was just the beginning. What I still had to go through, but now I had the power to face what was hidden in the very back of my mind. And he was gone, as if he had disappeared into that void. But I didn't feel alone anymore. As the shadows disappeared, the sky around me slowly began to change. It was dark, but now there were glimmers of light in its depths, not bright, but dim, as if the light were somewhere far away, somewhere in other worlds. I was still standing in that empty space, but it was different now. It wasn't as dead as it used to be. I could feel something starting to move inside me, as if I was starting to take shape myself. With every step I took in this place where time didn't exist, I felt the darkness begin to slowly recede, but instead of disappearing completely, it stayed there, like a shadow that follows us wherever we go. I couldn't understand what was happening, but I could feel something changing inside me, like my soul was becoming aware of something. I heard his voice again. It wasn't loud or aggressive, as one would expect from a figure who should have been a messenger of hell if such a thing existed. His voice was low, soft, yet full of power, like a gentle wind that could bend a tree but not break it. That's not all, he said. You think you've met everything that was hidden, but you've only touched the surface. You have to go further if you want to understand. You must find out what is hidden in these empty spaces. And if you can't do that, you'll stay here forever, trapped in the illusions you created. I felt his words sink deep into my soul. Illusions. I thought I was past my fears, past my weaknesses, but he said it was just the beginning. I should have understood more. I couldn't stay in this place where everything was both familiar and unknown. I had to find answers to the questions I hadn't asked myself. Why don't you let me go? I blurted out. Why are you bothering me? The shadow that was his incarnation moved smoothly, and as it moved, I saw something darker begin to show through its outline. I'm not the one holding you down. You keep to yourself. You are afraid to see the truth, afraid to realize that this is not the end. You were afraid of life, now you're afraid of death. You cling to what you know, even though that's what's bothering you. You don't want to accept your own darkness. You don't want to see her as a part of you. I could feel his words resonating in every corner of my soul. I never realized it until now. I wasn't afraid of death. I was afraid of what I might lose. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to be what I wanted to be. I was afraid that all my attempts to find my own way in life were futile. And now, standing in this place where time didn't exist, I began to realize that this place wasn't a punishment. This was something else. It was a test. You say you're not afraid of death, he said, and his voice was still calm. But you don't want to accept it as part of your journey. You want to avoid it. You want to be different. You want to change the world around you, but you don't understand that the world is inside you. He moved closer to me, and I felt his presence envelop me, as if I had become a part of him. He was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. His eyes shone with wisdom and understanding. He knew me better than I knew myself. You only see the outside world. You look for answers in other people's faces, in other people's eyes. But you can't find them there. You look for meaning in what others are saying, but you don't hear yourself. I felt his words sink in. It was like realizing that I was always looking for answers in other people, in other people's opinions, but I never listened to my own inner voice. I couldn't understand why I was so dependent on the opinions of others, on their assessments. But now it was becoming clear. What should I do? I blurted out, my voice filled with a desperate attempt to figure out how to get out of this circle. He looked at me, and there was something in his eyes that I couldn't explain. It wasn't sympathy. It was an understanding. You need to learn to keep quiet, he said. You need to learn to listen to silence, not words. You can't hear the answers unless you learn to hear the silence in your heart. When you learn to be quiet, you will find yourself. You will find what has always been in you. I stood absorbed in his words, feeling the silence begin to sink in. I always thought silence was just the absence of sound. But now I was beginning to realize that she wasn't empty. It was more than that. It was a space for awareness. A space to hear what was hidden. But how do I start? I asked, feeling something start to change inside me. He didn't answer right away, just looked at me. The shadow that surrounded us became more palpable, almost alive. I could feel its weight, but it wasn't ominous. It was like something inevitable, something I had to learn to live with. The silence will start inside you. Start by shutting up. Be silent to yourself, to your thoughts. Teach yourself to be at peace, even when everything is noisy around you. Only in this way can you hear what is hidden in the depths of your heart. I stood there in silence, feeling the change begin inside me. It wasn't an instant transformation. It was something gradual, as if I was beginning to regain some lost harmony with myself. And then, finally, it disappeared. But I knew he wasn't just an image. He was part of my mind, part of what I had to understand, accept, and let go of. I was ready to continue on this path. As his shadow faded, the void around me became unusually clear. I felt every movement of my mind become clearer, more conscious, as if I were moving through a dark fog and its thickness was beginning to recede. But instead of feeling relieved, I felt even more anxious. The silence he mentioned had become so real that it was almost unbearable. She was all around me, inside me. I could feel it in my breath, in every beat of my heart. In that moment, I realized that this silence wasn't emptiness. It was a space where I had to find myself. A space where all my fears, all my illusions could become visible. I walked slowly, carefully, as if the silence itself might destroy me if I took a wrong step. I was scared. I'm used to the noise. I got used to the endless hustle and bustle, to the external voices that defined my reality. And now I needed to learn to listen not only to silence, but also to the parts of myself that I'd always tried to ignore. Suddenly, the silhouette appeared in front of me again. This time, I wasn't afraid, but I felt a wave of excitement sweep through my heart. I knew it wasn't just a manifestation of my fears. It was someone who was connected to me much more deeply. As I drew closer, the figure gradually became clearer. It was a man, but I knew immediately that his face was familiar. It was a famous man-occult artist whose name I often heard in conversation. I always admired his work, his philosophy, but I never really thought about who he really was. He was someone we all thought was brilliant and unattainable, but now he was standing in front of me in this place that was neither alive nor dead. His eyes were filled with a depth similar to what I had seen in the eyes of the man who had met me in the beginning. But there was another power in his gaze, as cold as eternity itself. He was silent, but energy radiated from his silence. It was as if he knew what I needed to hear. And I realized that it was he who could give me the next clue to my path. I took a step forward, and he tilted his head as if sensing it. "You're afraid of silence, aren't you?" His voice was soft, but each sound was huge and powerful. I nodded, unable to speak. That was all I could think about. Fear of silence. The fear that it might consume me, dissolve me, as if I had lost my identity, myself. He looked at me, and his face twisted slightly, as if he was trying to figure out what I was really feeling. "You don't understand that silence isn't the enemy," he said, almost whispering softly, but each word was like a thunderbolt. "Silence is a space for birth. When everything goes quiet, you start to hear not only your fears, but also your answers. Everything you once looked for has been in you for a long time. But you couldn't hear until everything around you was so loud." I felt as if his words were cutting into me, evoking something deep and long forgotten. Yes, I was afraid of silence, because it revealed to me my inner world, which I had hidden for so long. I was afraid to face the parts of myself that felt alien and wrong. He continued. "It's not the silence itself that you're afraid of. You're afraid to face what it will reveal. In this silence you will meet your truth. And it will lead you to the place where you will find freedom." I tried to process his words. Freedom. I always thought that freedom is the ability to do whatever you want. Be who you want to be and be able to choose your path. But now it seemed to me that freedom was not something external. This was what was inside. It was an acceptance of yourself, of everything that is in you, even the parts that you tried to hide. He paused, as if giving me time to understand, and then added. "But you must be prepared for this path. To the path through the darkness." I could feel the tension in the air at his words. Dark. I couldn't help but remember that conversation with the one who met me at the very beginning. Once again, the darkness wasn't what threatened me. It was more than that. The darkness was the place where I could find my true power, as long as I wasn't afraid of it. "Darkness is not evil," he continued, as if he could read my mind. "It's just the lack of light. It is a space where you can know yourself and then become the light." I didn't know how to respond. I stood in front of him, feeling my thoughts become clearer and more confused at the same time. He continued to stare at me, and there was no pity or judgment in his eyes. He just waited. What should I do? I finally blurted out. He didn't answer right away. There was a depth to his silence. But then he said, "Go into the darkness. Don't be afraid of her. Accept it, and you will find your strength in it." I took a step to the side, but his voice stopped me again. "You won't get away from this path. You can't. But you can understand it if you realize that the darkness within you is not your enemy." I stood there in silence, feeling like I needed to move on. The darkness was waiting for me. And I knew that she wouldn't be scary if I stopped being afraid of her. As I stepped forward, the world around me began to change. As I took a step, the world around me darkened, and all those soft glimmers of light I'd seen before disappeared. I found myself in a void, in absolute darkness, in which there was no sound, no movement, no form. It wasn't just darkness, it was the silence of matter itself, its beginning and end. A place where neither space nor time existed. In that vacuum, I felt something begin to rise from deep within me. Something I hadn't even thought about before. It was like a flash of understanding, as if I suddenly saw the truth hidden in a world where everything was formless. But what was this truth? My footsteps didn't seem to leave any footprints. I felt a sense of emptiness growing in me, as I myself became a part of this space. The silence grew more and more intense. But there was something about her. I felt the presence of something huge, unspeakable. It was inside me and all around me at the same time. And suddenly, in that deep darkness, I felt a presence. Not physical, but energy. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. It was like the movement of an invisible ocean, as if I was floating in that sea without knowing what was beneath me. But it wasn't scary. It was natural, as if I had always been a part of this world, as if I had always belonged to this darkness. Then I heard his voice, that of the artist in front of me. His words were quiet, but there was a certain confidence in them, as if he was part of the silence itself. Darkness is not the same world as light. Darkness doesn't exist for fear's sake. It exists so that you can know what you are, what you can't see on the surface. You can't be free until you face what's hidden. I froze, unable to understand what he was saying. Face what's hidden. What is it about? I've already faced myself, my shadows. I've been down this road before. But something was different here. This wasn't some mythical test or metaphor. It was a real, live challenge. You're afraid because you're not ready to admit that you are this darkness yet. It was soft but unwavering. You can't be light if you don't understand that you are darkness, its embodiment. Don't be afraid of it. Accept it. I felt the words seep into my body, wrapping themselves around every thought, every sensation. Dark. Was I the darkness? I've always seen it as something alien, something to avoid, something to banish. I thought light was something high, pure, and right. And darkness is the opposite, it is evil. But now, his words shattered that illusion. How could I be darkness when I was always looking for light? You can't tell the difference between light and dark, he continued, as if reading my mind. You deny one aspect of your existence, thinking it will save you. But it is in accepting both principles that you become whole. Understanding the darkness gives you the key to the light. I closed my eyes and listened to my thoughts. They were quiet, as if muffled in the darkness, but now that I was trying to focus, I saw something new. Something that was always there, but I couldn't see it before. Fear is not something I should avoid. This is something that I must understand, accept, and feel in myself. In the fear, in the darkness, there is something important. But what was it? Suddenly, the darkness in front of me began to change. It became soft, like a thick mist that was beginning to change into something else, something alive, moving. It looked like clouds, but I could see silhouettes in them that were becoming clearer. They were human, but they weren't quite real. They were images of people I knew, but not quite. They were distorted, as if everything I thought about them was only half true. These were my memories of them, my ideas about them, but they looked alien, changed. It's like I'm trying to see them through a distorted glass. One face immediately caught my attention. It was my father's face, but it was distorted. He was looking at me, but his eyes were blank, as if he didn't know anything about my life. His eyes didn't have the kind of love and concern I'd once seen. I saw his fear, his doubts, his anxiety. I saw how he hid his pain from me, how he couldn't accept his shadow, his dark side. Do you see? The artist's voice said. It's your shadow. You see how you perceive people, but you didn't see them for what they really are. You look at them through your fear lens, through your illusions. Accept them in this. Accept them not idealized, not corrected. Accept them whole as they are. I stood as if in a trance, looking at that distorted face. Everything I'd once thought about my father, everything I'd tried to hide, was now there in front of me. I saw his weaknesses, his fears, his insecurities. It wasn't a relief, it was the realization that all the people I loved or respected had their own shadows, their own weaknesses that I hadn't seen before. The shadow of each of us is something that we cannot control, the artist continued. We fear it because it reflects our vulnerability. But it is through recognizing these weaknesses that we become whole. You must learn to see not only light, but also darkness in others, as well as in yourself. I sighed and looked deeply into the twisted face. And in that moment, I realized that I could no longer avoid what was hidden. I had to accept everything I had ignored for so long, both in myself and in others. I couldn't take my eyes off my father's twisted face, which now seemed to be a part of me, a part of this shadow I'd been avoiding for so long. I saw not only emptiness in his eyes, but also regret. A regret that I always tried to ignore, avoiding his weaknesses, those aspects of his personality that didn't fit in with my idealized image of him. He was a man, with his own fears and pain, with his inability to be strong when I expected him to be. And maybe I was afraid to admit that it was part of me, that insecurities, those hidden fears. Do you see? The artist's voice said. It's not just his shadow, it's your shadow too. We all hide something inside ourselves that we can't accept. And this hidden part of our soul still leaks out, even if we try to hide it. I took a step forward. The fear of what I might see continued to plague me, but it wasn't so deep now. It was something I had to experience, understand, and let go of. My father's shadow and weaknesses could no longer simply be alien to me. It was part of my own world, part of what I had to admit to myself. And so, a new mirror appeared in front of me. It was not clear, but muddy, like the surface of water that is covered with a light layer of dust. But despite its blurriness, I could feel something beginning to show in its reflection. I looked into it and saw myself. I was young, with the same expression I remembered from my childhood, but with eyes full of longing and unspoken questions. I could see how I was trying to be strong, how I was reaching for the light, running away from my inner dark corners. It was my reflection, but it didn't feel right. Do you see yourself? The voice came again. He was as soft as water, but I sensed a challenge in his tone. You were trying to escape from your true self. You tried to create the perfect image to avoid the pain. But you can't be whole if you avoid your reflection. I took a step toward the mirror and touched its surface. My fingers didn't touch the glass, but melted into it, as if the mirror were a living thing. In this hazy reflection, I saw many fragments, my face, but also many other faces, people I had once interacted with, and maybe even those I had long forgotten. Each piece was a part of me, a part of my experience. But in each of these fragments, I saw features that were alien to me, features that I pushed away because they didn't fit into my picture of the world. I saw the people I once disliked, but I couldn't figure out why. I saw their weaknesses, their worries, their mistakes, and suddenly realized that it wasn't something bad. It was part of human nature, part of what I couldn't accept about myself. I tried to be strong, to be perfect, but in these fragments I saw my own vulnerability, my own human nature. I touched the mirror again, and it grew brighter, as if my eyes were finally beginning to see not only light, but also darkness. In the reflection, I could see a clearer face now, the face of an adult, the face I was now. That face was full of emotions I'd avoided before. It was me, all of me, with my fears, my mistakes, my weaknesses. At that moment, the mirror began to distort, and I saw figures coming out of it, images of people I once knew. But now their faces were calm. I saw my family, my friends, and for the first time there was no judgment, no dissatisfaction in their faces. They just looked at me, accepting me for who I was, with my weaknesses, with my mistakes. It was then that I realized that all the people I loved, who were part of my world, they didn't ask me to be perfect. I imposed this ideal on myself. They accepted me. Only I couldn't accept myself. It was my shadow, an unspoken part of me that I tried to hide. I felt something start to change in my body. Not immediately, but gradually. The fear that had once held me was now less solid, as if I were breaking its shackles. The shadow was no longer something evil and alien. It was a part of me, a part that needed to be understood and accepted rather than feared. At that moment, the artist reappeared in front of me. He wasn't as clear as before, his face was now lost in shadow, but his voice was still as powerful and clear. "Do you see what's happening now?" His words carried a soft, almost imperceptible tinge of joy. "You started seeing your own reflections. The darkness no longer scares you, because you understand it. You see the light not in the other, but in yourself. In accepting your shadow, you will find wholeness. The path you took was not a path to salvation. This was the path to self." I stood there, feeling a lightness I hadn't known before. There was no more fear in her shadow, no more burden. I realized that now I don't have to look for salvation in others or in idealized images. I could be myself, with all my imperfections, with all my weaknesses, and that was enough. I began to see my integrity. And that was the real release. "Are you ready to move on?" "What is it?" he asked, and I felt his presence begin to fade again. I nodded, and in that moment, my heart felt at peace. The darkness was no longer an enemy. The darkness was a space where I could be free. The darkness was part of the light, part of me. As soon as the artist disappeared, the world around me changed again. The darkness that had been so dense and gloomy before was now beginning to gently dissipate. I felt something shift inside me, as if I was not just walking, but overcoming huge, invisible barriers, opening up new horizons for myself. Each breath became easier, and each movement more confident. I no longer felt afraid of what I was seeing. I was as silent inside as I was in the space around me. And I realized that it wasn't emptiness. It was freedom. Suddenly, a new space opened up in front of me, and I found myself on a high cliff, standing on the edge of a boundless ocean. Its dark waters seemed endless, and the waves that broke on the rocks sounded like the voice of the earth itself. I was standing on the edge, feeling the light wind brush against my face, and in that moment I realized that I was standing on the border of two worlds, the world where I was before and the world where I can be who I really am. There was no pain or fear in this passage. It was the quiet realization that I was going where I needed to go. I turned to see what was standing behind me. Along the cliff, following the same path I had taken, invisible footprints appeared. They weren't left by my feet, they weren't visible to the eye, but I could feel them. They were the marks of all the decisions I'd once made, all the fears I'd once been hesitant to let go of. These footprints were part of my path, and now I wasn't afraid of them. But then I noticed something strange. Something began to move in the dark water in front of me. I couldn't make out what it was, but the shape was getting clearer by the moment. It was a shadow moving across the water, and in its silhouette I recognized a familiar face, the face of the artist. He was standing on the water, and even though I knew it couldn't be physically possible, he was there. His face was calm, his eyes as deep as the abyss itself. He didn't look at me, but I felt that he was with this world, that he was part of this ocean, part of this silence, part of me. I took a step forward, and his gaze, as always, was directed to infinity, as if he never intended to return, as if his journey was eternal. But I wasn't afraid. I didn't feel like I needed to change anything. I knew that despite his silence, he was a part of me. We were both part of this world, peaceful and deep, which I now felt in its entirety. Suddenly his voice cut through the silence. "Everything you were looking for is already here. You didn't come here to find answers, but to be a part of those questions. The path you took was not one of salvation, but one of realization. You couldn't be in this place if you didn't free yourself from fear. But the journey will continue. You didn't finish, you just started to understand." I stood there, taking in his words. I realized that the path I had taken was not the end. This was just the beginning, a new stage. I began to look not only at myself, but also at the world around me. I knew that my shadow, which I had feared for so long, was now my strength. And these forces did not need to be found somewhere else, they were in me. I closed my eyes and felt the ocean begin to ring around me. It wasn't empty, it wasn't silent, as I'd thought before. In its boundless waters, I felt a living breath, as if the world itself was rising and falling in the rhythm of its existence. I became part of that rhythm. I opened my eyes again and saw figures rising from the depths of the ocean, people or shadows, but they were moving in a single stream. I realized that these figures are all those with whom I once shared my life, those who were important to me. These were all those whose shadows I had once tried to ignore, so as not to see their weaknesses. But now I knew it wasn't a mistake. It was part of my journey. These people, their shadows, their weaknesses, they were connected to me. They were following the same flow I was following. There was no judgment in their eyes, no reproach. Their faces were peaceful, even happy. We were all in this ocean, in this vast, strange and beautiful space where there was no distinction between light and dark. I felt a new path opening up before me. This was not a path leading out of this world, but a path leading deep into oneself and deep into the world. The path of awareness, the path of unity. It wasn't an easy path, but there was no fear, no pain. It was full of vivid experiences, full of awareness. Are you ready to go? The artist said, his voice sounding like an echo, but with an inescapable power. I nodded. And it wasn't a gesture of submission. It was a gesture of understanding. I didn't look for any more answers. I wasn't looking for salvation. I only sought awareness, freedom, acceptance of my shadow, my power. I knew that this path did not lead to a single point, but the path itself was the answer. I took a step forward. And in that moment, the world around me was filled with light and darkness, one and inseparable. The step I took was not just a step forward, but a step into myself. Instantly, the space around me changed. The ocean has become not just a water element, it has become a metaphor. I realized that everything I experienced was happening not only inside me, but also in the world itself. I wasn't just an observer. I was part of this world, and the world was part of me. All the darkness I saw, all the vast horizons that opened up before me, were just reflections of what was inside. The ocean became transparent, as if its waters no longer hid anything. I could see how everything inside me connected to everything around me. In its depths, I saw not just the physical world, but all my fears, all my worries, all those parts of my personality that I rejected, once avoided, considered unnecessary or dangerous. And these shadows, these hidden aspects of me, were no longer enemies. The darkness that I once saw as an enemy has become a friend, a companion. She wasn't angry. She was just another side of life. Without it, there would be no light, and without light, there would be no awareness of darkness. I realized that light could not exist without shadow, and shadow could not exist without light. This was the only way to achieve true integrity, to integrate both sides. And as soon as I realized that, I felt my own boundaries begin to dissolve. I became one with this world, with this ocean, with this darkness and this light. Suddenly, an unknown figure appeared in front of me. She was standing on the water, her silhouette indistinct, as if she were part of the light, part of the water. It was something I couldn't describe. There was no fear in her presence, no uncertainty. I felt that this figure was both familiar and alien. As if it were my own shadow, but in its manifestation was the whole essence of life, the whole essence of being. Are you ready to understand that this isn't the end? The figure asked, her voice deep and thoughtful. It wasn't clear, but I could hear it inside me. It wasn't an ordinary voice, it was the voice of reality itself, of life itself. I froze. The understanding I've been searching for so long has finally arrived. It wasn't just the realization that I was a part of this world, but that the world itself was a process. It is not complete, it has no end. It is constantly changing, evolving, and every moment, every experience is only part of a huge, endless journey. This was neither the beginning nor the end. It was an existence. You say it's not over. But what then? I asked, even though the voice in my heart already knew the answer. Everything you see exists in an instant, the figure replied. Everything you experience is just a continuation of what was and a harbinger of what is to come. In every step, in every movement, you create a new reality. The path you took was important, but it's not the end. You've seen your world, you've accepted it, but now you have to learn to live with it. You must understand that awareness is not a point, it is a process. I felt the words sink in. Awareness is a process. This is not a moment, not a discovery that can be completed. Awareness is something that lives inside, that develops with each step. I realized that now I don't have to look for answers. I was already in the process. I was already on my way. And this path was not the ultimate goal, it was important in itself. You survived death, but now you are experiencing life, the figure said, and its image became even clearer. It was a face like my own, but there was no fear in it, no pain. It was a face that took on everything, light, darkness, life, death. It was a face that had become part of the world, and there was a very special calmness about it. I realized that this figure was no stranger to me. It was me, my true self, that I hadn't been able to see for so long. I was not just a body, not just a person, not just a collection of emotions and thoughts. I was all of it at the same time, and it was more than that. I was part of the process of being, part of a world that was changing and evolving, just like me. With each step I took, I began to feel new horizons opening up. It wasn't like the traditional enlightenment. It wasn't a moment when I suddenly understood all the answers. It was just the realization that questions will always be a part of me. And that was normal. I stopped looking for completeness. I stopped striving for some ultimate truth. The truth was in every step, in every moment that I experienced. The figure on the water took a step toward me. Her face became clearer, and I realized that it was not just a person's face, but the world itself. It was the face of being that changes shape but doesn't disappear. It was the face of something that would always be with me, no matter how much time passed. You realize that your path is not the path to something. This is the path itself. You are now ready to go into this world not as a seeker, but as a part of what is already there. You're ready to be a part of everything. You are ready to be the process of life itself. I nodded, and in that moment I felt my every step, every movement, every thought become part of this endless river of life. It wasn't just the beginning of a new path. It was an understanding that the path never ends, and it's not scary. It was a release from the illusion that I had to achieve something. I was already a part of everything. And at that moment, the world I lived in was filled with light. Not blind and bright, but soft and natural. It was not an accomplishment, but an existence. And I knew that was just the beginning. At that moment, in my heart, I felt true awareness. I accepted not only my light and shadow, but everything around me. And it was liberating. Darkness and light, death and life, fear and love, all these opposites merged into one whole, which I no longer tried to separate. I wasn't looking for meaning, because life itself was meaning. I realized that the path I took was not one that led to something finite, but one that allowed me to become a part of everything without striving for the end result. Every experience, every moment of life has now become not something detached from the world, but a part of it. All those scary moments, all the questions I'd asked myself, were now finding their place. I didn't have to look for the answer to everything, I could just be, and that was enough. I accepted my existence as something infinite, like a stream that moves and, at the same time, always stays in one place. There was no beginning or end to this realization, only the present, which was like an ocean, enveloping me. The world that surrounded me was no longer my opponent. He became my friend, my ally. Every corner of it, every shadow and light, seemed full of meanings I hadn't been able to see before. And despite that, I didn't feel like I needed to fix or change anything. I accepted the world as it is and became part of its great process. With every step, with every breath, I felt myself connecting with this world more deeply. I stopped being a bystander. I became part of this great symphony of life, which was so multifaceted that every chord was important. I realized that life and death are not opposites. They exist in a single flow, where it doesn't matter where one moment ends and another begins. The process itself is important, the ability to live in every moment is important. Then I felt the artist reappear at my side. It wasn't as clear as it used to be, but its presence was palpable, in every breath I took, in every whisper of the wind. He was looking at me with a calmness I could now understand. You've learned that life is not something that can be completed. She doesn't come to you with ready answers. It comes with questions, with the opportunity to learn, to develop, to be a part of this world, without demanding perfection. You weren't looking for answers, you were looking for acceptance. You found it. I nodded, and the movement was all I could put into words. My life, my shadow, my fears and joys were all part of one great whole. I no longer tried to find the path, because I was already on it. And it was in this acceptance that there was liberation. At that moment, the world became like an ocean again, boundless and deep. I could be a part of it, not trying to fill the void, but just being in that flow. And it was liberating. When I looked back, the artist was gone. But I knew that his presence would always be with me, as something more than just a teacher. He was part of my very essence, the light and shadow that I had embraced. I stood there, feeling light in my heart. There was more freedom in this moment than I'd ever felt before. I wasn't looking, I was just there. And if you are also looking for answers to questions, if you want to understand this world, accept your shadow and light, subscribe to the channel to go this way together. This is not the end, but the beginning of the new understanding that we are all looking for. And perhaps you will also find your way to awareness, as I did. Share your experience, and let this path be shared.